When Jake stole from a black homeless man in the alley, he expected cash, not secrets. But what he found inside the bag made his blood run cold. The wind howled through the narrow alley, curling around the damp bricks and rustling the crumpled newspapers scattered across the pavement. It carried with it the biting chill of the approaching winter, sinking into Jake's bones as he pulled his tattered jacket tighter around himself. His stomach growled, an unwelcome reminder that it had been nearly 2 days since his last proper meal. He kept his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, his fingers brushing against the few crumpled bills he had left. Not enough. Not enough for a warm meal. Not enough for shelter. Not enough to fix the mess his life had become. Desperation gnawed at him, a feeling he had grown far too familiar with. Jake's gaze flicked around the dimly lit street, scanning the shadows for opportunity. He had learned to survive by trusting his instincts, and right now those instincts whispered that he needed to act fast. Then across the street, he saw him. A lone figure sat slumped against the cold brick wall of a deserted building. A homeless man. He was wrapped in layers of worn-out clothing, a beanie pulled low over his graying hair. The dim glow of the streetlight cast long shadows across his face, highlighting deep lines carved by time and hardship. But it wasn't the man's appearance that caught Jake's attention. It was the small, tattered bag clutched tightly in his hands. Jake slowed his pace, his eyes narrowing. There was something different about the way the man held it. It wasn't just resting on his lap or carelessly tossed aside like most homeless folks did with their belongings. No, this bag was important to him. His fingers gripped it like a lifeline, knuckles pale against his dark skin. Every few moments he would adjust his grip, as if reassuring himself it was still there. Jake's curiosity flared. What's in the bag? It couldn't be much. Probably a few scraps of food, maybe some worthless personal trinkets. And yet, something about the way the man held it told a different story. There was value in that bag. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but enough for a man with nothing to cling to it like his life depended on it. Jake licked his lips, his mind already spinning. This was it. His chance. He had stolen before, picking pockets, snatching unattended wallets, even sneaking into stores when the owners weren't looking. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about curiosity. What could be so precious to a man who had nothing? Jake took a deep breath, steadying his nerves as he stepped into the shadows, his movements calculated and silent. The night was on his side. He would find out soon enough. Jake remained hidden in the shadows, his back pressed against the cold, crumbling brick wall of the alley. The dim light from the flickering street lamp barely reached him, casting jagged shapes across the pavement. He steadied his breath, watching. Across the street, Marcus sat motionless except for the occasional twitch of his fingers against the tattered fabric of his bag. His lips moved in silent conversation with himself, whispering words too soft for Jake to hear. The homeless man seemed lost in thought, his weary eyes fixed on the street lamp above him, as if searching for answers in its unstable glow. Jake's gaze dropped to the bag in Marcus's lap. The zipper had slipped open slightly, just enough for Jake to catch a glimpse of something metallic reflecting under the dim light. Something valuable, Jake thought, his pulse quickening. A ring? A watch? Jewelry, maybe? The idea sank into his mind, drowning out the voice of hesitation that barely clung to the edges of his conscience. It didn't matter what it was. What mattered was that it had value, and value meant money. Money that Jake desperately needed. His fingers curled inside, his pockets, an old habit from years of picking pockets and swiping unattended belongings. He had always been quick, precise, unseen. This would be no different. He took a slow step forward, his body low to the ground, moving like a shadow slipping across the pavement. The distant hum of the city played in the background, the occasional honk of a car, the muffled chatter of people far away, the soft whistle of the wind snaking through the empty streets. The world was too distracted to notice what was about to happen. His heartbeat pounded louder with each step he took. He was close now. Close enough to hear Marcus's faint muttering, "Not yet, not yet." The words made Jake hesitate for half a second, but greed overpowered curiosity. This will be easy. He reached out, fingers inches from the worn fabric of the bag. One quick pull, and he'd be gone before the old man even realized what had happened. Jake held his breath, and then, just as his fingertips brushed the bag, Marcus's murmuring stopped. Jake's fingers closed around the tattered bag in one swift motion, his instincts taking over as he yanked it free from Marcus's grasp. The rough fabric scraped against his skin as he bolted down the sidewalk, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. The night swallowed him whole as he ran, the cold air biting at his cheeks, but he didn't care. He had done this before, too many times to count. A quick grab, a sprint, and he'd disappear into the maze of abandoned buildings and empty streets. By the time anyone realized what had happened, he'd be long gone. But something was off. No yell, no desperate scramble, no angry curse, nothing. Instead, from behind him, he heard a deep, tired sigh. "You shouldn't have done that." The words were soft, barely above a whisper, but they carried through the empty street like a ghostly echo. They made Jake's steps falter just for a second. What? He risked a glance over his shoulder. Marcus hadn't moved. He still sat slumped against the brick wall, his expression unreadable under the dim streetlight. His hands rested limply on his lap, as if he had already expected this moment to come. A slow chill crept down Jake's spine, though he quickly shook it off. Whatever, he thought. The guy was probably just another crazy old man talking nonsense, to himself like the rest of the people who had given up on life. Jake scoffed under his breath and picked up his pace. As he reached the end of the block, he ducked into a narrow alley, weaving between overflowing dumpsters and rusted fire escapes. The smell of rot and damp concrete clung to the air, but he was used to it. He had spent too many nights lurking in places like this, avoiding cops, avoiding trouble, though trouble always seemed to find him anyway. At the far end of the alley stood an old abandoned building, its boarded-up windows cracked at the edges, graffiti staining its walls like scars. Jake had used it as a hideout before, a place where he could lay low when things got messy. Tonight, it was where he would claim his prize. He slipped through a broken side door, the rusted hinges groaning as he stepped inside. The darkness swallowed him whole, but he knew the layout well enough to navigate by muscle memory. A few steps in, he dropped to the ground, his breath still heavy from the sprint. The bag felt light in his hands, too light. His excitement flickered, replaced by unease. His fingers traced the edges of the bag before he finally unzipped it, eager to see what treasure he had just snatched. But as soon as he looked inside, his stomach twisted. No wallet, no food, no drugs. Instead, staring back at him was a small stack of crumpled, yellowed papers, an old photograph, and something metallic, catching the faint sliver of moonlight through a crack in the boarded-up window. Jake frowned. This wasn't what he expected, not at all, and something about it felt wrong. Jake sat cross-legged on the dusty wooden floor, the abandoned building silent around him except for his own breathing. His pulse was still racing from the chase, but now, instead of excitement, unease crawled up his spine. The bag lay open before him, its contents scattered across the ground. He had expected cash, jewelry, maybe something he could sell for a quick buck, but what he found was nothing like that. His fingers hesitated as he picked up the first item, a stack of old, creased letters. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink smudged in places as if someone had held them too tightly for too long. Jake unfolded one carefully. The handwriting was neat but shaky, like it had been written with a hand burdened by time and pain. Dear Emily, I hope this letter finds you safe. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for your birthday. I promised I'd come back, and I will, no matter how long it takes. Jake swallowed. His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through more pages, each one signed the same way. With love, Daddy. His throat tightened, but he pushed the feeling down and reached for the next item. A photograph. It was old and faded, its edges curled from years of being handled. In the picture, a little girl with tight curls and wide, innocent eyes beamed up at the camera. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. She was perched on the shoulders of a man, her father, no doubt, his strong hands gripping her ankles to keep her steady. And then Jake saw the man's face. His breath hitched. It was Marcus, but not the Marcus he had seen slumped against the brick wall tonight. This Marcus was younger, cleaner, his sharp jawline free of the scruff Jake had seen earlier. He wore a crisp uniform, a badge gleaming on his chest. His expression in the photo was different too, not worn down, not lost, but full of pride, full of life. Jake felt a strange, twisting sensation in his gut. Slowly, he reached for the last item. It was heavier than the letters, colder than the photograph. A police badge. His heart thudded in his ears as he turned it over, his fingers tracing the engraved name on the front. Detective Marcus J. Robinson. Jake's smirk, the one he had worn so confidently when he first stole the bag, was gone. His mouth felt dry. Detective? Marcus wasn't just another homeless man. He wasn't some nameless drifter wasting away on tea or the streets. He had been someone, and Jake had stolen from him. His fingers tightened around the badge, the realization slamming into him with the force of a freight train. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt something unfamiliar clawing at his chest, guilt. The letters trembled in Jake's hands. The flickering moonlight through the cracked window barely illuminated the words, but he could still make them out, every painful sentence, every desperate plea. His fingers tightened around the brittle pages, his breath coming in uneven bursts. To my little girl, I'll always come back for you. His throat felt tight. He had been expecting money, valuables, maybe something he could pawn for a few quick bucks. Instead, he had stolen something far worse, something irreplaceable. Jake swallowed hard and forced himself to keep reading. The letters weren't just messages to a daughter lost in time. They were pieces of a man's shattered life. Marcus J. Robinson had once been a respected detective, a man who dedicated his life to protecting others. He had a daughter, Emily, whom he adored more than anything in the world. Every letter spoke of her laughter, her love for drawing, how she used to wait at the window for him to come home from work. Jake could see it in his mind. A little girl staring out a window with hopeful eyes, waiting for a father who never came back. His stomach churned. Then the letters shifted. The warmth in Marcus's words slowly darkened. I don't know how much longer I can fight this. They took everything, the badge, the job, the house. But worst of all, they took you. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears as the truth unfolded. Marcus had been set up. A decorated detective framed for a crime he didn't commit. The system he had served betrayed him, twisted the truth, and buried him under lies. He had fought, appealed, begged for justice. But the world turned its back on him. Years passed. His savings drained. His friends disappeared. And in the end, he was left with nothing. Not even the chance to watch his daughter grow up. Jake clenched his jaw. He knew the feeling of being abandoned. He knew what it was like to fight for something and lose anyway. But this was worse. This man, this broken man sitting in the cold, clutching the last remnants of his life, had been someone. A father, a protector, a man who had once mattered. And Jake had just taken the only things he had left. A sickness settled in his gut. He looked down at the badge still in his hand, the metal now warm from his grip. Marcus had spent his life fighting for others, and in return, the world had thrown him away. And Jake? He had just kicked him while he was already down. For the first time in years, Jake felt something stirred deep within him, something that had been buried under years of survival, of selfish choices and hardened instincts. Regret, shame, and the overwhelming need to make things right. A sudden creak shattered the silence. Jake's head snapped up, his heart hammering against his ribs. The musty air in the abandoned building felt heavier now, pressing in on him. He turned toward the doorway, and his breath hitched. Marcus stood, There, not slouched, not defeated, but tall, steady, his silhouette framed against the dim light from outside. His worn-out clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, but his presence filled the room with something far more imposing. His dark eyes, sharp despite the weight of time, locked onto Jake like he had seen straight through him. Jake's fingers twitched toward the bag, as if he could shove everything back inside and pretend this never happened. Marcus took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate, calm, unshaken. "You took something that doesn't belong to you," he said softly. The words weren't a threat, they weren't even angry, but they sent a chill down Jake's spine. He scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over the stack of letters. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He had talked his way out of plenty of bad situations before, but this time, the excuses felt hollow, like they'd dissolve the moment they left his lips. I didn't know," Jake stammered, his voice thinner than he wanted it to be. "I thought—" Marcus tilted his head slightly, waiting. Jake swallowed hard. He couldn't say it. "I thought you were just another homeless guy. I thought it wouldn't matter." Marcus took another step closer. "You should have left it alone." Jake tried to take a step back, but the room suddenly shifted around him. A wave of dizziness crashed over his body, his vision blurring at the edges. He blinked rapidly, trying to steady himself, but his limbs felt sluggish, heavy, like the air itself had thickened. His stomach twisted. His fingers, still gripping Marcus's badge, trembled. "What?" The word barely escaped his lips. His mind raced, trying to understand. The dizziness deepened, his vision swimming. His legs buckled and he stumbled, crashing down to his knees. His breath came in ragged gasps. Marcus hadn't moved. He just stood there, watching, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with knowing, as if he had seen this before, as if he had been waiting. Jake's fingers loosened. The badge slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the floor. His eyelids felt impossibly heavy, his body no longer his to control. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Marcus's face, calm, unreadable, and filled with something Jake couldn't quite place. Not revenge, not hatred, just inevitability. Jake's consciousness stirred like a boat rocking on violent waves. His body was cold, too cold. His fingers twitched against damp concrete, and as his eyes fluttered open, a sharp, pulsing pain radiated through his skull. He groaned, rolling. Onto his side, the world around him still spinning. Where am I? The dim glow of a streetlight barely illuminated the alley. The same alley where he had first spotted Marcus. The same place where he had planned his theft. But something was wrong. His fingers instinctively patted his pockets. Empty. His breath hitched as he checked again, this time more frantically. His wallet, gone. His phone, gone. Even the old, tattered jacket he had been wearing was missing. Panic surged through his veins like ice water, his backpack, the letters. The badge, all of it, gone. His heart pounded as he scrambled to his feet, swaying as dizziness threatened to pull him back down. His mind raced. Had he been mugged? Had Marcus? Then he saw it, a single piece of paper weighted down by a small rock sitting beside where he had lain. His hands trembled as he reached for it, fingers stiff from the cold. The paper was rough, torn from a notebook, the ink hastily scribbled but legible. "Now you know what it feels like." Jake's throat tightened. His mind reeled, trying to piece together what had happened. Had Marcus drugged him? Taken everything from him in some twisted act of revenge? A bitter laugh clawed at Jake's throat. "Serves me right," a voice whispered in the back of his head. But something felt off. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a broken shard of a mirror wedged between the bricks of the alley wall. Instinctively, he stepped toward it, his reflection barely visible in the shattered glass. His stomach dropped, sprayed across his face in thick graffiti-style markings were bright red letters, police symbols, a crude stencil of handcuffs, and worse, falsely written in bold, dripping strokes, "Wanted criminal." Jake stumbled backward, his pulse roaring in his ears. He scrubbed at his face with his sleeve, desperate to wipe it off, but the ink had already dried. It wasn't coming off. His mind spiraled. This wasn't just humiliation. This was a brand, a walking target. If a cop saw him like this, they wouldn't ask questions. They'd assume the worst. People wouldn't look at him and see another street. They'd see a dangerous man, someone to be avoided, reported, or worse, hunted. Jake's breaths came fast and shallow. This wasn't just payback. This was karma, sinking its teeth deep. Jake stood frozen in the alley, his breath visible in the cold night air. The sting of humiliation burned deep, but it was nothing compared to the sinking weight of realization pressing on his chest. His hands shook as he traced the police markings. On his face, fingers trembling over the bold, false accusation now branding him a wanted criminal. He finally understood. He had stolen from Marcus without a second thought, assuming the man was just another homeless drifter, someone who wouldn't fight back, someone who didn't matter. But Marcus had mattered. Once, he had been a protector, a father, a man of honor. And then the world had taken everything from him. Jake had judged him without knowing his story, just as the world had judged Marcus before. A shiver ran down his spine, though it wasn't from the cold. It was the terrifying realization that this crushing weight of being seen as nothing more than a criminal was exactly what Marcus had endured. How many people had crossed the street to avoid him? How many had sneered at him, assuming he was a failure, a nobody? How many doors had slammed in his face simply because someone had already decided who he was without knowing the truth? Jake turned, eyes scanning the empty street, searching for Marcus, and then he saw him, a shadow against the city lights. Marcus stood at the far end of the alley, his silhouette still, unshaken, as if he had been waiting for Jake to understand. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Jake opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to ask for forgiveness, but Marcus simply gave a knowing nod. Not of anger, not of triumph, just acknowledgement. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Jake stood there, watching, the weight of his own choices pressing down on him. Marcus could have done worse. He could have beaten him, turned him in, taken everything in true revenge. But instead he had done something far crueler. He had let Jake feel it. Because some lessons weren't taught with words. Some lessons had to be lived. As the city swallowed Marcus whole, Jake felt a haunting thought settle deep in his bones. Sometimes karma doesn't wait. It teaches you the hard way.